There's a new programme on bbc2 for everyone who loves their home. We'll be looking at lighting, telling the story of Scandinavian style, and finding out how an architect can change your life.
Morning, darling. Where do you want your programme put in?
You're a bit late, aren't you? Start again. There's a new series on bbc2 for everyone who loves their home. We'll be looking at lighting, telling the story of Scandinavian design, and finding out how an architect can change your life.
Homefront, Tuesday, 8:30 on BBC2.
And don't be late.
There's an interview with Homefront presenter Caroline Quentin in the new issue of the Radio Times, which also contains complete listings for all television and major satellite channels. Looking forward to the lazy, hazy days of summer now on BBC2, the first part of Delia Smith's Summer Collection.
BBC2 launches a series of classic science fiction movies introduced by me, Craig Charles. First on the launch pad is Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Violating our airspace is an act of war, not friendship.
A tale of romance,
Why couldn't I have met you sooner, Buck Rogers?
conquest,
Tomorrow I conquer Earth.
and friendship.
Very nice, Buck. We don't have a thing to worry about.
Will Buck and his friends save the Earth? Join me and find out. Spaced Out, Monday, 6 o'clock, BBC2. Beagly, beagly, beagly.
The Navy's policy to allow men and women to serve together at sea attracted much publicity about on-board romances. Public Eye in a quarter of an hour looks at whether the equality drive is working. And that's after a review of the week's headlines on BBC2.
This week, What the Papers Say is presented by Michael Leapman of The Independent.
Good evening. Is it the end?
Broken.
Finito.
The end.
No, it isn't John Major they're talking about. It's Paul Gascoigne, currently playing for the Italian football team in Lazio.
Paul Gascoigne is fighting to save his career after breaking his jinxed right leg in 2 places yesterday.
And the other question of the week also came from Italy.
Did Mussolini really get the trains running on time?
No prizes for the answer.
Like almost all the supposed achievements of fascism, the timely trains are a myth, nurtured and propagated by a leader with a journalist's flair for symbolism, verbal trickery, and illusion.
But why are you telling me this now?
It's an argument we may hear again following the election triumph from Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia and its allies, who include neo-fascists. After all those years of chaotic politics and corruption, perhaps what the country needs is a smack of firm government.
Yes, well, we will come to John Major in a minute, but let's stick with Berlusconi for a while. The papers have a problem in that most of us gave up trying to understand Italian politics a long time ago. Asked to name famous Italian politicians, your average British reader could come up with only 2. Mussolini we've had already, and the other?
Let us not forget that Italy fathered Machiavelli.
That was Robert Graham in the Financial Times, at the end of a profile of Berlusconi that, like many, fell back on the old Italian clichés to try to explain what it was all about. Such as opera.
As in opera, the staging and music have been all-important. The banality of a libretto is masked easily by the magic of a prima donna's great performance. So in Berlusconi's spectacularly successful election campaign, form triumphed over content.
The tabloids found their own way of covering the story, concentrating on form of a different kind in the shape of Berlusconi's wife Veronica, a former actress.
The bit parts that caught her premier's eye. She's the sex bomb who's set to become Italy's first lady.
The profile of Berlusconi in The Independent,
Italy's arch-seducer.
managed to drag in references to other Italian icons, Casanova, Garibaldi, Michelangelo, while in The Independent on Sunday, Fiona Laney, for good measure, threw in Federico Fellini and his 1985 film Ginger and Fred.
The film is a scathing attack on the values disseminated by the private television circuses that Fellini so loathed. Less than 10 years later, the country has chosen as its leader a man who has built his private fortune and his electoral success on those very values.
It was Berlusconi as media tycoon who also aroused the concern of Will Hutton in The Guardian.
If it was the Sun what won it in April 1992 for the Conservative Party in Britain, Il Giornale, Canale 5, Rete 4 and Italia 1
Sounds like the football results.
have performed a no less signal achievement for Silvio Berlusconi and Forza Italia. There is a new phenomenon abroad in Europe, a right-wing media aggressively taking up the right-wing cause and massively shaping public opinion.
While the Daily Telegraph drew a different moral.
Any party which has been too long in power, which has lost public confidence and which is tainted by scandal, must look with trepidation at the Italian upheaval.
You see, I told you we'd get to John Major. To say he's had a bad couple of weeks would be to invite the shrugged reaction, so what's new? His experience almost ever since he won the 1992 election has been enough to make you wonder why a man like Berlusconi would ever want to be Prime Minister, seeing that media tycoons have so much more power to shape events. Rupert Murdoch, for instance, clearly decided a while ago that Major's time was nearly up, and a poll in his Sunday Times this week told us that this view was shared by 41% of Conservative MPs.
Many Tory MPs expect Major to go. Heseltine emerges as front-runner.
Its leading article said that Major's troubles amounted to
a terminal plight. The Prime Minister's stock has plunged to such a low that the question which now dominates discussion among senior Tories is no longer if Mr. Major will be forced to resign, but when.
And in case we didn't get the message, it was repeated in letters 1 3/4 inches high across 2 pages.
Not if, but when.
People are sniffing death. There is despair and venom in the air.
The latest hoo-ha began last week after Major had backed away from his threatened showdown with Europe over the size of the blocking minority in the enlarged European Union. The Daily Mail summed it up in a word.
Surrender.
The Conservative Party's anti-European faction was predictably outraged, and one of its number, the Northampton MP Tony Marlowe, told the Prime Minister in the Commons,
"You have no authority, no credibility. Why don't you stand aside and make way for someone else who can provide the party and the country with direction and leadership?"
Distilled by the Sun into the headline,
Stand down!
a view shared by most voters, according to the Gallup poll in the Sunday Telegraph.
2/3 say John Major must go.
And go he did, to his constituency in Huntingdon, a visit which incidentally provided a nice illustration of how a paper's political prejudices can rub off even onto its caption writers. Here's the anti-Tory Observer.
Alone with his pint. Major in Huntingdon yesterday.
While the Conservative Sunday Telegraph gave us the same pint, but a broader picture.
Among friends, John Major has a pint with party workers.
Friends, though, were by now getting thin on the ground, as former allies defected fast. Lord Rees-Mogg, for instance. In The Guardian, David Mackay usefully reminded us that just after Major's election as leader in 1990, Rees-Mogg had written in The Independent,
The Conservative Party may have stumbled across a remarkable Prime Minister. The probability is that he will be leader into the next century.
Yet by this week, the same Rees-Mogg was writing in The Times,
We all know the Prime Minister is short of ideas. Many of us think he lacks ability. And nobody supposes for a moment that he will still be leading the Conservative Party, let alone the nation, into the third millennium. He is like a ship which has lost power and can therefore no longer steer.
For those thinking of a mutiny, The Independent on Sunday gave them a handy how-to guide.
6 ways to get rid of a Prime Minister.
Men in grey suits.
Sudden illness.
Cabinet rebellion.
A Commons vote.
Ministerial resignations.
A leadership challenge. Tory MPs wishing to be rid of the Prime Minister must find a stalking horse, a candidate who is not expected to win, but who can flush out enough votes to show the extent of dissatisfaction.
Ah, yes, the stalking horse. I wondered how long before that beast galloped across the horizon. The News of the World had its candidate ready.
Top Tories were last night pressing former Cabinet Minister Kenneth Baker to stand as a stalking horse candidate in a plot to topple embattled PM John Major by stepping into the ring.
I don't think stalking horses step into rings, but carry on.
Mr. Baker, sacked by Mr. Major after he came to power, could be rewarded with a return to the Cabinet if Michael Heseltine became Prime Minister.
The boxing metaphor was hard to resist, and the Sun didn't resist it.
Hazza B. Clark, how they rate in number 10 fight.
Hezza, unlike Gaza, was ahead on fitness.
A mean fighting machine until his heart attack last year.
And on his wardrobe.
Immaculate in £750 dark blue suits from top tailor Shearer and Nielsen, but seen as flashy.
Which I suppose is another way of putting a criticism that Megan Tressida, in the Sunday Telegraph, attributed to a cabinet colleague.
The kind of man who combs his hair in public.
Clark, on the other hand, probably seldom combs his at all. Back to the Sun.
Dubbed thinking man's lager lout. Oxfam chic in rumpled suits, unironed shirts. Wears scuffed suede hush puppies even with dinner suit.
Alan Massey in the Telegraph captured him perfectly.
Kenneth Clark gives the impression he would be happy doing a soft shoe shuffle before a row of near-naked ladies, straw hat on head and twirling cane in hand. There is a touch of Archie Rice about him, as he takes pleasure in outrageous sallies from the dispatch box.
I ever go, ladies.
With a nod to the ex-Tiller Girl speaker Betty Boothroyd.
I ever go, don't I? Don't clap too loud, it's a very old building.
Veteran troublemaker Sir Nicholas Fairburn, more your pantomime horse than stalking horse, was not impressed by either contender. He told anyone within earshot,
I don't like Clark, and I don't trust Heseltine. I think he's a spib, and Clark's a bounder.
But that didn't mean he supported Major.
I do think he's not up to the task. He is more like a ventriloquist's dummy than a Prime Minister. He is Van Ordinaire, and he should be chateau-bottled.
Several papers had the idea of adapting the ubiquitous fantasy football and cricket leagues to the leadership contest. The Daily Mirror thought of it first.
It's great. It's great. It's coming your way. The Fantasy Premier League. Pick the next PM and boost your budget.
Next day, The Guardian followed suit in an April Fool jape that turned into a damp squib.
Starting today, Cabinet Makers, the game of inter-parliamentary political fantasy.
And then Keith Waterhouse lumbered into the act in the Daily Mail.
Play Butt Dream Cabinet. All you have to do is to choose a butt dream cabinet even more inept and incompetent than the one we have already.
By now, Major was ready to launch a counterattack. He chose as his battlefield Basildon in Essex. A Sun leader explained why.
2 years ago, one result on election night spelled victory for John Major. Basildon voted Tory, Major stayed in office.
But now the people's mood had changed, partly because of the tax increases that went into effect this week.
They feel cheated, conned, let down. The Sun has no doubt that a Tory government would be best for Britain, if only we had one.
The Daily Mail said,
There is just a suggestion of the charge of the Light Brigade about John Major's dash to Essex.
Certainly it seemed as if someone had blundered, as Chris Buckland noted in the Daily Express.
It turned out to be a Meet the People tour without many people.
And those that were there weren't best pleased.
Take a hike, Mr. Major.
2 heavily pregnant mums had to hike 1.5 miles across a field to hospital yesterday because John Major was opening a maternity ward there.
One of them, Joanne Lilly, told the Sun's Sue Crawford,
We had to walk all the way in the rain and cold. It's not a brilliant way for John Major to improve his rating.
The Telegraph's Frank Johnson wondered why he went to the maternity ward at all.
Is this your first?
He was heard asking a new mother. I wish politicians would not do these things. He needed her more than she needed him. She should have asked him.
Is this your first leadership crisis?
Well, no. I've had quite a few. I'm not going to tell you how many. 1 or 2 of them are quite grown up now.
Anyway, he must have thought the visit went well, because next day we learned...
Major's great poll gamble. John Major will personally lead the Tories' local election battle in a high-risk gamble to save his job.
At least that means he won't have to go to the West Indies.
The team that died of shame. March the 30th, 1994. England out for 46.
And it wasn't long before we were peddled the familiar line that the disaster was part of the British disease.
The decline of cricketing ability and sporting gumption generally is the clearest symptom of our loss of purpose.
That was the Sunday Times profile of the England team.
A lament for hope and glory.
While for Mike Marcuse in The Guardian we were...
A nation stumped to its very soul. English cricket today provides an uncannily precise reflection of the nation's wider malaise.
Personally, when I hear people trying to equate sporting achievements with national pride, I reach for my copy of the souvenir programme for the 1936 Berlin Olympics, and I was glad to find an ally in the Observer's Francis Wheen.
Play up, and get on with the real thing. Politics is indeed a matter of life and death for the ruled, if not the rulers. Cricket is a game, for God's sake. If as a nation we can't see the distinction, we deserve to go on losing.
As it happens, we're at the first anniversary of another sporting debacle that rocked the nation's psyche.
National disgrace.
National disaster. From false start to false finish, Aintree's race that never was stuns Britain.
Tomorrow will see the culmination of a year's effort to ensure that this time the Grand National does at least get started. The Daily Telegraph described what had been achieved.
6 men with fluorescent flags, radios and an electronic gate will next week try to do what 2 men with a rolled-up flag, a length of sagging tape and a bowler hat could not achieve a year ago.
The Observer sends it all out for us in this pretty drawing.
First fence.
1 advanced flag operator.
Melling Road.
2 advanced flag operators.
Communications.
Senior starter and flag operators equipped with radios and 2-foot by 3-foot fluorescent flags.
They seem to make a lot of these fluorescent flags. Do they expect the race to be run in the dark? And what colour will they be? Well, don't ask. Careless talk and all that. As the Sunday Express told us...
The colour of the flag has been changed to foil would-be demonstrators. Jockeys riding in the Grand National will be told the flag's new colour just before the race.
I can confirm that the colour of the starter's recalled flag will not be the same as usual,
says Jockey Club spokesman David Pipe.
James Bond stuff. But back to the Observer's drawing.
The new start.
Senior starter presses button hidden from jockey's view.
High-tech indeed, but there are some who decry all this modernity, as well as the moves to make the fences less dangerous. Here's Ginger McCain, trainer of the legendary Red Rum, writing on the same page.
Don't let's make the Grand National a race for poofters and girls.
For what?
For poofters and girls.
And this is the right-on politically correct Observer.